Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Matt Presti. He is the former president of the University of Science and Philosophy in Virginia, and really happy to have him on the show. Matt, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jack. Great to be back, you could say.
Yep. So full disclosure, Matt and I did this probably about a week ago and had some kind of snafu with Zoom, and the recording is lost in the ether. But maybe Russell would say that that conversation had an energy and it still lives on somewhere in the universe, even if we don't have a recording of it. I think you're muted.
So yeah, we'll certainly try to recapture some of those highlights.
Sounds good to me. Well,
right.
I guess I'd like to start off by asking a question. The show is called Cognitive Dissonance, and I think we're seeing a lot of cognitive dissonance today. That idea that when people are so entrenched and ingrained in a way of thinking, something that they've learned maybe as a child, and their parents reinforce the idea, their teachers, the media, their politicians, they're so lost in that idea and so committed to that idea that when presented with perhaps the actual truth, which is in opposition to their idea or belief, they just simply cannot accept it. They reject it, and it's almost impossible for them to consider another alternative. How do you think we're seeing cognitive dissonance today?
Well, it certainly is an understatement. Holding two things in your mind that are diametrically opposed to each other, and only one can be true. So, the fish have yet to get above the water, really. And I'd say it's the progression of consciousness that makes the decision for whether people come to the truth or not and can overcome cognitive dissonance. So I like the title of your show. I think we briefly touched on that in the last interview that disappeared into the ether, but we have no worries there because we have no cognitive dissonance, and that it is gone. And we're doing this again in an effort to again bring mind into a material form to share with people. So I'm happy to join you. Cognitive dissonance, the only way to overcome it is to perceive that which is true, which is reality, and that will dissolve the illusions. And I think that's, from a psychological standpoint, a very heroic thing. And the hero in this society today is shunned, put into the back seat. And so I think we really need heroes today, and people need to be their own heroic figure and their own archetypal psychological savior, if you will, to overcome this kind of mental mind control and conditional programming.
Absolutely. And speaking of that principle of cognitive dissonance, I think most people, your average citizen, if they read anything by Walter Russell, and we'll dive into his work in a little bit, but my guess, and you'll know much better than me, is that the average person that would read Russell would probably think this is crazy stuff and probably reject it pretty much right off the bat. For me, I read the Universal One, and I think I was lucky in that I had read and learned a lot of similar principles and philosophies that were in line with Russell's work. And I had a major epiphany when I read that book. It just kind of brought everything together. I had all these facts and things that I believed in my head, mostly about science and the way things actually work. But when I read that book, it all made sense. It all came together. But I think I'm a rare bird in that regard. Do you find that a lot of people reject his beliefs, his teachings, philosophies?
Well, interestingly enough, there's probably our largest contingent of our student body are people that came out of academia expecting to find the answers that Walter and Leo have given them. So the university itself, founded on December 2nd of 1948, and became the University of Science and Philosophy in the state of Virginia. They had to establish their own curriculum to call themselves a university and have a certain number of students in the body of the university. I think it was 5,000 at the time. So the University of Science and Philosophy's role in the world was to teach the science of man, which is Alexis Carrel, his book of the same title, The Science of Man, expounded upon how there were all these sciences, but there was no science of man himself and his soul and his mind and his purpose. So it's really the great existential questions: who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And the purpose of humanity, I think, was answered in the Russell's home study course. And like I said, a large contingent of our student body hails from academia. They were hoping that in their university education, they would find these answers, these existential questions and answers in the material they were taught at university. But as we know, university, it's supposed to be a universal education, but it's become very, you could say, polarized, very political. And I'd say about 80% of the universities in the world are so politicized that, there's no emergent truth. They're more or less teaching cognitive dissonance in the form of social programs. So it's refreshing to know that a university like this exists. And when I came upon the Russell teachings, The Secret of Light was where I started. It clicked immediately. Might be because I have a bit of a musician background, but it read as poetry. It read, the meter of it was divine, and it took my soul on a journey. And I would often say in past interviews, I'm lucky to find maybe 2 or 3 nuggets or kernels of truth in an entire 300-page book. But on The Secret of Light, literally, there were 3 or 4 on every single page of that book, and I had to lay that thing down and just think on it and back up 2 or 3 pages and reread it as the kernels of light were popping in my mind like a popcorn machine. So ultimately, what I garnered from the home study course, The Secret of Light, and all the works that I've read over the years is a majestic approach to understanding man's purpose, his divine nature, and truly working knowingly with the inner mind power that we call divinity. And it really is a standalone kind of approach to understanding the human soul and its purpose.
You find too that you're able to understand more, I guess, mainstream principles and concepts that maybe we learned in science class or whatever class it is. For me, it brought a lot of things together, and I think it automatically sort of dispelled some of the things that we were taught. But at the same time, it kind of brought a lot of things together and helped everything sort of click in my brain. Did you have any similar experience as you started to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dispelling absurdities, sort of, there's no contradictions in nature, but yet 90% of material science has no idea how nature works. And when you come across an incredible mind that was illumined to the degree that Dr. Walter Russell and his wife Lau Russell were, you can't help but come away with a deeper understanding of how nature functions and what its purpose is. Nature truly is the creator's thinking, and as Dr. Russell said, the cardinal error in science lies in shutting the creator out of his own creation. It's like shutting Mozart out of his own symphonies and giving the credit to some entity that wasn't even him. So ultimately, yeah, the dispelling of things that don't make sense. Again, there's no contradictions in nature, and when you look at certain things like black holios or quantum, this idea of quantum packets, as if energy comes in salt and pepper packets. Honestly, it's kind of a ludicrous way to try to create a working model that is a concept of everything, which is what they're truly looking for. And I think he gave that to the world in 1927 in The Universal One, which, by the way, is our best-selling book here. And really some people consider his magnum opus, but ultimately he'd go on to write and distill his own science over the years, 40 plus years of distillation and refinement. And his ultimate presentation, along with Leo, was the book Atomic Suicide, which was the science on steroids. Honestly, it was not only poetic but brave in a way that, just for instance, one chapter in that book, "We Define God," on page 107. It's quite a chapter heading. No heading in of
Hell of a way to
chapter in
start a book.
history. Right. "We define God." Imagine that. If that doesn't pique an interest, I don't know what will. So
It's so funny you say that, because I was just about to ask about God, and um, what would how do Russell's teachings uh, contradict traditional understandings of God, and how are they similar?
well, interestingly enough, some people refer, even our current president, John Bonsall, who's done just a wonderful job in transitioning with me here, going out of the university and him coming in, he refers to the universal one as the Holy Grail. So it's funny that Dr. Russell, when he was about to reprint the universal one after he passed the initial 1,000 copies out, 700 scientists and 300 universities roughly received copies of that. One of which was Nikola Tesla, who wrote back in that famous line. He said, "Lock it up in a sepulcher for 1,000 years, because mankind is not unfolded enough to begin to even understand this precise science of nature and God." So the Pope himself, upon his, it did get around that,
Yeah.
science of the day was trying to figure things out. The quantum theories were beginning to come in. Quantum physicists were beginning to take over the chairs of the major universities, while the natural scientists were sort of being removed from those chairs. So we began to fall into a deeper state of materialism, and the materialist philosophy was becoming dominant. So when the Pope heard about this, he threatened to issue a decree against Walter Russell in the book, The Universal One, if he should attempt to reprint it. So we think that's probably the main reason why it was never reprinted in his lifetime. Though in 1974, Leo did, brave up and end up reprinting the Universal One, and
Yeah.
we've been printing it since. And it truly is an incredible book. And but ultimately, how would they define God? They would define God as mind, as consciousness, as light, the light of mind itself, which centers all polarized divisions and hemispheres in nature. And that's the missing fulcrum, which most of materialist science doesn't pay any attention to. And that's the origin of mind. It is mind itself, that undivided, sexless, unconditioned white magnetic light of omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent mind is how they would define it. And truly it is, all idea exists there. It is the source of all things, from whence motion stems and returns. And Russell clearly explains how the divisions of light are illusory because they're temporal. Anything temporal cannot be true. It's going to be riddled with effects and complex in its motion.
Right.
But the source of all complexity is simple. And when you can understand this, you're creating that grand unified conceptual sight, which neither has cognitive dissonance, nor does it have contradiction. So in that sense, when you learn to see, to get behind motion and unify the hemispheres of the brain, you could say, into a divine state of seeing things, then you can command motion to imbue it with your own divinity by understanding cause and effect in the same way.
And how would you describe the one mind / God concept to a skeptic, or just not even a skeptic, just the average Joe, so that they could conceptualize it? I mean, most people think of God as a singular entity that lives way up in the sky somewhere. Is this more, God is omnipresent, the one mind is within all of us in all things? How would you sort of wrap that into a neat package and describe it?
Well, number one, God 2.0, we need a new definition, and that's why the Russells define God in a new way that was garnered from divine illumination versus sense faculties,
Right.
which are secondary to cause. Senses are only respondent to effects of motion. They can't perceive cause at all. So yeah, is God a angry white God on the side of a mountain casting lightning bolts and killing firstborns? Of course not. Is God locatable in the physical universe? No, because God is not himself physical. And again, we refer to God with the pronoun him, which is what basically has been used for thousands of years. It's unfortunate that you really can't refer to God as they or him, her, but the Russells would call the creator the mother, father of creation. So meaning that God divides itself into male and female, which must unite to create another rhythmic balanced interchange in the form of an offspring or child. And electricity is no different. And electricity unites around a neutral line in terms of a linear two-dimensional waveform, right?
Yep.
But that central neutral line is the creator, and the opposite motions of waves above and below 180 degrees, that line, are the two-dimensional manifestations. Walter would bring science from a two-dimensional. He basically took alchemy and transformed it into three-dimensional alchemy. I like to call him a true 3D hermeticist and a 3D alchemist versus the square and the circle. He brought us the cube and the sphere as the sole tools of creation that God uses to create waveforms, which are both life and death giving. The wave itself is life and death. Unfortunately, the senses of man can only perceive death, the death half of the wave, which is why we blow things up. We blow up fuel, we blow up gasoline, we blow up coal, we blow up firewood. You know, we burn things. As Russell would say, flame is the ultimate consumer of bodies. So we're using death as opposed to using the life half of the wave to compress, you could call it, to compress radiated matter back into a compressive state. So the 3 octaves of matter prior to hydrogen, which Russell shows on his charts of the elements, are what the planets and the suns breathe. That's what space is. And it's not a vacuum. It's full of space gases, which are compressed into spheres and then at 90 degrees expand through equators to give their heat off back to the cold dark of space. So he truly does give a unifying explanation and conceptual realizations to this idea of a unified theory, a grand unified theory. No one's come close to it, in my opinion, not even, you know, the big toe theory or any of those, Tom Campbell and others. Just they're trying to use materialism as a philosophical basis to explain what must have a spiritual component, and the spiritual component is mind itself. And how can we deny mind when it is absolutely causal? The proof for it is anything man-made was first an idea in the mind, and there's over 1 trillion material examples that I'll present, and we'll call that Exhibit A in the court of ridicule, which they'll certainly go for that, but there it is. I mean, first it must be a idea in the mind, and then you have to desire. Through desire is the cord, the electrical cord that you must use to create and build that body with your own 2 strong arms. And then once you build it, behold, it stands before you. Much like this podcast, you're building a podcast, and hopefully this one won't.
We'll manifest it into something a little more concrete this time.
Right.
So let's talk about pre-man. How does mind work and desire when there are no humans? How was mankind conceived and come into existence?
That is a question for the ages. One of the best questions. I can't really answer on behalf of the Russells what their personal views were on how did man come to be. I often wonder if man and animals weren't all born from the plant kingdom, maybe perhaps in some kind of pod, or who knows? I mean, you're going back a long way there, but could it be that everything began as a single cell? It's possible, but it sort of calls into the question of evolution. Is that possible? And if monkeys, if they were our progenitors, then why have they not evolved to
Right.
be flying spaceships as well? So there's certainly a lot of speculation about that question, but as far as the Russells were concerned, and most other spiritualists on this planet really don't have a really great explanation for how mankind came into being.
Well, it seems
And then-
that, people or everyone should redefine what mind means. We think of mind as generated from the brain. But if mind is out in the ether, it's everywhere, it's omnipresent, and not generated by man, then maybe that leads us a little closer to the answer. And along those lines, do you think that humans are more of like an antenna or a receiver of information? When you have thoughts, ideas, a discovery, was that almost divinely inspired, for lack of a better way of putting it? Did you receive that information from the universe, from the one mind, or did you conceive of that in your own brain?
Nikola Tesla would agree with you. We are receivers and antennas. I mean, we broadcast and receive. So mind really is, in the Russell sense, and in many other traditions, spiritual traditions, being a causal, omnipresent field. It's the real field is mind itself. It's everywhere. And so mind it's not generated from the brain. It thinks through it. And that's the difference between, say, the Russell cosmogony, which is more of an idealistic philosophical viewpoint rather than a materialistic one, which says that mind or thinking is a effect of the brain and the electrical activity of the brain. Right. But when the soul leaves the body, the brain is as dead as a computer without electricity. So what is the real electricity in the body? And Dr. Russell, his cosmogony, pinpointed the location of all power in the universe is at 90 degrees to motion. So as opposed to thinking there's power in your arms or in either divided hemisphere of your body, left, right, the ears, you notice your senses are all balanced. Mm-hmm. Even the tongue has its flavor on,
yeah.
So
I don't know which is which, but yeah.
Right. So anything that's divided is an effect of an electrical compressive expression. So the mind itself, being undivided, causes divisions in motion. So what science does is it tries to come at the cause of that from a materialistic standpoint. It's like they're going backwards as opposed to forward. But the mind, when you understand it to be causal, which is basically idealism in a nutshell, there must be something causing matter and motion to exist as a cause and effect relationship. Again, Exhibit A, anything man-made did not just blow up like the Big Bang says. This bookshelf behind me didn't just materialize one morning and then notify my senses, oh, it's there. No, I had to conceive of this bookshelf to house all their books, because I woke up at 3 a.m. one morning back in 2019, and the still small voice said, what kind of a university doesn't have a library? And I went, great, God, so you want me to build a bookshelf now to put all these books by the Russells on? And there it is, standing before us. Beautiful. So ultimately, if you don't build the body for the idea that's in your mind, and the electric cord to get there is called desire. And we have 60 to 80,000 human thoughts a day. Which one are you going to hold long enough to build a body for it? And that's really the process that I've learned from Walter Russell, is how to hold those thoughts, how to build the body for it. And that also explains, free will is really the ultimate arbiter when it comes to fulfilling either good or bad, good or evil. You can create balanced bodies, or you can create unbalanced bodies. We see a lot of movements out in the world today that are thoroughly unbalanced. And then we don't see very much balance in the world. So ultimately, your free will is ultimately what creates evil, because nature has no free will. It is what it is. It's following instinct control.
So there is no good, there is no evil in nature. Would you put it that way?
Well, there's definitely no evil, I would say,
Right.
but it just is a reflection of God's thinking. However, it doesn't have free will, and if it did, you would see evil in it, because at that point, you have the ability to go against what was created for the purpose of expressing its divinity. And that's just it. If we didn't have free will, we would be on instinct control. We would be operating like nature, in balance with everything. But the trick of desire is this: you can use it to create a nuclear weapon that will devastate countries and kill millions of people. And that's been allowed to happen. We don't need an extracurricular or a exterior force called evil or the devil to sway people are quite capable enough of making choices that are unbalanced, and
Right.
unbalanced choices are what we call evil, because the ending result is pain and suffering. So ultimately, those who make balanced choices are creating good in the world, if you will, and those who make unbalanced ones are creating what we call evil. But free will makes both of those conditions possible.
Makes sense. That's beautiful. I'd like to touch a little bit on the science a little bit more, and then maybe an overview of Russell in general. But one thing that just resonated for me was the concept that, and this is the way I understand it, so please correct me if I'm off here, but there is but one substance in existence. And that one substance, I don't know if we want to actually call it a substance, but that one thing is light. And a lot of what you've said today brings me back to that concept over and over again, with opposing forces and the interaction of substance to create matter and motion. But if I understand correctly, light is the only thing that exists, and it's sort of disruptions in the waves or interactions with different waves of light that inevitably and eventually create matter. And so the way in which that light interacts sort of dictates what elements are created. So all of the elements are essentially the same thing. They're all just light, but it's how much of it, how tightly it's wound together in union, and how that light is interacting, which defines those elements. And that sort of dictated his periodic table of elements, which I think is so much, so far superior to the one that we learned in school. And it was just so intuitive to me. When I saw that, I was just, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is the truth. This is, there's no questioning this. It's just too perfect to not be true. So am I capturing in my rambling way how matter is created and how light is the one substance in existence?
Yeah, it's interesting because he'll go on to distill that, especially in Atomic Suicide, when he talks about electricity and light. Both him and Leo were incredibly definitive when it comes to understanding that. But basically, he'd say light is all there is. It's all we have to deal with. And understanding that all chemical elements are simply different pressure conditions of a single waveform, but that waveform is repeated and multiplied to the gazillion times throughout the entire universe. So all light happening everywhere is happening everywhere at the same time. There's no need for light traveling when it's happening all at the same time everywhere, which also, sort of, it shoots down this idea of time travel, which is only necessary if you have a linear outlook on the world. Then time travel, of course, linearity, if that's a word, To be linear in your mindset means you're going to look at time as a beginning and end, but ultimately waveforms will seemingly have a beginning and end, but the divisions of the light wave motions caused by the single substance, which is mind. Ultimately, again, we go back to mind, and really, it truly isn't even a substance. It's a substance-less concept, as he goes into in Atomic Suicide, and especially the home study course as well. Mind really is all there is that we have to deal with. And it is light, and it is that one substance from which all other seeming substance emerges and is swallowed up by. And he would often say that prior to his thesis, his conceptual presentation, the Universal One, nobody had sufficiently explained how planets were born from space and then were swallowed up by space. So he was the first to really give a unified theory. And I wouldn't even call it a theory, I'd call it a concept, because theory means just theoretical, but
Yeah.
this is actually a working model that does have reproducible and experimental results in the laboratory. And that's something that's going to come out in the future down the road. But this science is one that I think no matter what humanity does over the next few thousand years, nothing in this science is going to actually change, because it's that true to nature. It will remain impeccable for thousands of years, because it is indeed the really and truly true way that nature itself works. But he does go on to, describe how matter emerges from space, how it's swallowed up by space, through the divisions which create polarity in that oneness, to create male and female bodies that then must interchange, become one. And we can all imagine this. Our mother and father had to do this for us to even be here to have this conversation. Two men can't do it. Two women can't do it, And so the way that a lot of the looking out at the universe is, understanding polarity and how duality really truly is centered by a fulcrum, which is what I call triality. If you take the fulcrum into consideration, then there's really three. Instead of just male and female, there's the creator or the mind centering the two. To say that I'm only a left hemisphere brain or a right hemisphere is to negate the middle. Don't negate the middle, or you'll miss out on all the splendor. As Bruce Lee said, don't look at my finger pointing at the moon. You'll miss all that heavenly glory. Look at the damn moon.
Right.
Yep.
Well put. So along those lines, is sexual intercourse, the exchange of sperm and egg, is it essentially when there is that union between a sperm and an egg, is that almost the same principle we were talking about before, where light or energy is intertwined and creating matter? Same kind of principle?
Yeah, the union of opposites is what, the voidance of polarity, the oneness in the union of opposites is what's required. So you have to revisit the creator to create another division in motion, which when you understand how that works, truly understand, it's as if when you breathe in, you hit a point where you have to stop breathing in. And that's what you could say is the cubic wave, the plane of the cube, which then you must reverse direction to exhale. And so exhalation, you also meet the plane of the cube, and then you have to reverse direction to inhale again. So each time you're inhaling and exhaling, you're meeting the creator, who bounds all wave fields of motion, which breathing and the cycle of breathing is a wave field motion, and centers that wave field. So like the heart itself, we have the atrial and the ventricle. Each is an opposite expression of the heart's function, not as a pump, but as an implosion regulator, which is what the heart truly is. It's regulating implosions. And, so yeah, the light is always there. It's just, the key is to notice it and to work with it. And from that point, in other words, you're getting behind motion, getting behind your own thinking. And like a marionette, you're commanding your body to imbue all your creative efforts with your own divinity. And
And
the
you've
more
talked,
man realizes his oneness with that light of himself, the greater his focus, imagination, the greater his ideas and creations.
you've spoken about the that balance, the left and right hemisphere, and where evil comes from. Clearly, Russell was, I don't know any other way to put it other than divinely inspired. And we could talk about that and the experiences he had. But how does one balance those two hemispheres to, tap into their higher self or the one mind?
Well, you got to create a dialogue with your own spirit, which is the immovable. It's what is dwelling dead center of your entire being. And so few of us have a dialogue with that. It's also called the still small voice. You remember Jiminy Cricket, always let your conscience be your guide, right? I mean, who does that anymore? Who teaches that? Who focuses people's attention toward their own inner fulcrum? And realizing that that fulcrum is theirs is firstly, and if you have to fake it till you get it right, I recommend you do it. But you need to have that internal dialogue, which also means listening to that still small voice. And if you learn to listen to it, you will find that what you considered to be major problems in your life, emotional reactions will sway. You'll be able to be calmer in the face of unbalance, things of that nature. So by having that balance and that fulcrum within, that realization of it, and the moment to moment connection and awareness of it leads to greater and greater abilities in terms of even using your senses beyond what most people think senses are capable of. When Walter had his 39-day illumination, he wrote of how he could see people coming up and down in the building outside of his loft. He could see people riding up and down in the elevators through the walls with his own two eyes, and that's the uses of the senses that we haven't even begun to touch on. And there's others in this world who have done that too. Some of the yogis and things of the
Yes.
past 1,000 years have certainly been able to acquire new uses for their own senses.
If you read Autobiography of a Yogi, you've ever read that one?
Yeah,
some pretty incredible stories in there.
His views are incredibly similar to when he describes the light wave motion universe as a motion picture universe.
That's
and
interesting.
He would cite how, I think we talked about it the last time we got together, how the movie screen is white. And why is it white? Because it could not reflect the visions of the color spectrum unless it was. So space, by its definition, Dr. Russell said, God could be uniformly expressed as either a white or black canvas. So very interesting.
Now, isn't it true? Well, is it true that he had this 39-day? First of all, how do you phrase that? What was it called?
An illumination.
Yeah, 39-day illumination. Did he basically go into this 39-day long epiphany, and when he came to or snapped out of it, however you want to put it, he was divinely inspired. He had all this knowledge, this wisdom, and from that knowledge he gained from those 39 days was able to, write maybe Universal One, I forget, but a lot of the wisdom that he shared came from that unexplainable by modern standards phenomenon. Is that kind of how it happened?
Yeah, illumination, basically scientifically explained, is a short circuit between the hemispheres of the brain, an electric short circuit. And at that point, you're catapulted into the divine light. And he wrote very extensively about the process of how that occurs. He went through the red spectrum, then the blue, and then into the white light. And what it ultimately led to, that experience began with a coronal mass ejection on May 9th or 10th of 1921.
What does that mean, coronal mass ejection?
Well, there's a massive ejection of energy, you could call it, or waves, from the sun itself, which is reproduced on the surface of this planet. And he wasn't the only one, I might add. There were others who were affected by that CME back in 1921.
So his illumination corresponded with that event.
Yeah, it's a very interesting phenomena, but others as well, I think. And he went and sought the seclusion of his chamber, he would write, and he disappeared basically in his state for those 39 days. His family was concerned. They called two doctors. One was I think a scientist, and the other a psychologist, perhaps. And they reviewed all his stuff. He was doing these charts and graphs, hundreds of them, and his writing of the Divine Iliad, message of the Divine Iliad, ultimately was what would come out of that, which is 39,000 words with nary a correction, of him taking literally dictation from this creative centered light within him. So him and God, as he called it, became one on the high mountaintop. And he was taking dictation, and he wrote all this down. And that became the basis of the new science that he was supposed to deliver to mankind, because mankind was going on a dangerously off the beaten path of materialism toward his own destruction, especially with things like, using radioactivity and lighting radioactive elements on fire. In other words, to produce electricity was what led him to write Atomic Suicide, him and Lau. So, that divine illumination, it's not the first experience. It's the most, I'd say, the least experienced of all experiences in the human realm. There tends to be some connotation of psychosis that, people will have this experience, and instead of realizing from a psychological level what is actually happening, people are labeled nut jobs, or,
At the very least, just not taken seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And so how many people have actually ended up in institutions because they were actually having a divine illumination? We'll never know. But Dr. Richard Maurice Buck, did a book called Cosmic Consciousness, where he reviewed in 1900 the top 40 cases he felt were actual divine illumination, proof of divine illumination, either through their writings or through their art or through their expressive talent, that they were able to, he was able to pinpoint similarities in the experience of their own writings, and how,
Wow,
those minds affected the entire growth of mankind and the culture of man as a
did
whole.
Russell have multiple experiences like this throughout his life?
His first one occurred when he was 7 years old. He would have one every year around his birthday in May. And his mom would say, "Oh, Walter's having another one of his queer spells." He'd go off and run into the woods and come home, hours later. So he'd spend all his time in the woods alone with God, he'd say. But every year around his birthday, but every 7 years, at 7, 14, 21, so on, and at 49, he'd have these, what he called the great illuminations. And the 49th birthday, he said he was prepared for this all his life, but that was the one that he was given the new science of tomorrow and commanded to give to man 7 years hence that date, which was his release of the Universal One.
And, for anybody listening that's having trouble wrapping your brain around this or accepting it, it sounds crazy, this guy went into a trance and he woke up and he had all this knowledge. Look into Russell's work and look at the diversity of his work and what he was able to do. We've talked mostly about science, which is mind blowing. Some of the stuff he, disseminated, but he was an amazing artist. He was an amazing sculptor, painter, musician, I believe, right?
Yeah.
But go on the university website and check out examples of his paintings and his sculptures. And it's hard to explain how one man could create such beautiful artwork in so many different mediums, and also, figure out the way the universe works and be the smartest scientist of all time. It's almost unexplainable by any other means besides what Matt just shared with us. And if you would just quickly touch on his multi-talented, character.
Absolutely. He mastered all the 5 fine arts with only a 4th grade education, dropped out in the 4th grade to work at the family grocery store. And he'd go on to Massachusetts Normal Art School from age 15 to 17, I believe, and then over to Europe to study for a couple years. But so he had no formal training other than those short years in the normal art school and in Europe. But ultimately, as an author and a writer, and especially with the experience of Illumination, I think it's important that people understand that Illumination isn't a, let's say, trance, as you called it. It's
Yep.
more a massive inspiration. And anytime you're ever inspired, you're having a divine illumination. It may be on a scale of 1 to 10 at a 0.5, but when you're really inspired, that is illumination. And we've all been inspired. But how many of us follow that inspiration and hold that thought, right? A lot of people will have an inspiration, then they'll go turn the TV on. See ya. So long, inspiration, gone. Or they go, as Walter said, they'll go to Coney Island and buy a ticket to ride the Ferris wheel.
So
You know,
is an
so-
inspiration akin to that sort of short circuit that you described between the two
Yeah.
hemispheres?
Yeah, that's where the light bulb over the head, that's an
Yeah.
inspiration. I've got an idea. Oh my God, hold it. Hold that idea. Build the body for it, people. That's the difference between genius and mediocrity. Mediocrity has the illumination. They have the inspiration. They get the light bulb. They get the idea, but they don't do anything with it. Genius says, I'm going to build this MFer
Right.
and it's going to stand before the world. That's the only difference. One holds the thought and builds the body for it. The other discards it into the ether back where it came from. So
Do-
we're all capable of illumination. It's just when you get that inspiration, that initial inspiration, follow
Hold
it,
it.
man. Follow it, guys, because that's where it's going to lead to more. I've had 11 of my own and they've been incredible. I mean, talk about a heart opening. I even laid out a 7-year plan to put Walter's work back out into the world. And I named each year as it was given to me. And that was a 15-second long illumination. I dropped to my knees, burst into tears, enveloped in this light for just a few moments. And my whole path for 7 years was laid out. I mean, I can't make that stuff up. And the good part too, you don't have to drink or smoke or take DMT or do any of that stuff to receive these illuminations. You just, like you said earlier, be that antenna that is open to the centering force of divinity within you. And all the world's the stage. At that point, the world is at your fingertips.
Is
And,
meditation a good way to tap into that?
well, I like to say, Leo hit the nail on the head there. There is no posture, form, or technique to God. God is, period. So for me, driving seems to be one of the most meditative experiences. We touched on the interview that went into the ether prior to this, that I was driving. One other illumination I had was about a 45-minute one, and I was actually catapulted by the incredible hues of the sunset over the Ozark Mountains down in Dent County, Missouri, coming back right at sunset. And the most brilliant colors overwhelmed me. And I literally was floating hundreds of feet above the vehicle. My body was on autopilot, and I'm witnessing the sunrise and the sunset in all its glory. But yet my body was aware and could still function and drive the vehicle flawlessly, while my mind hundreds of feet above was taking in the glory of that sunset. There's never going to be an experience like that again in my life that was that intense, but it's one I'll never forget. But I do know that mind is not localized to the brain, and that proved it to me. So, I mean, it's quite an amazing thing to know that we all have that power within us. And it's a sober experience. It's a substance-less experience. It doesn't require anything to get there other than following your inspiration, because that's what's going to open up and make it more likely that you'll eventually one day, like Russell, have that major illumination.
Did Russell
And
have, students that had similar experiences? Was he able to sort of teach how to tap into that? I keep saying tap into that. I don't know the best way to put it.
well, I would say the Home Study Course 3rd edition is probably the best guidebook ever written on how to tap your own divinity, how to tap into your inner genius, to unfold it, to work knowingly moment to moment with the creative force that we call God, that we call creator or the divine. You know, this is the manual, the how-to on unfolding your innate genius within. And it's 932 pages, 12 units, each with 4 lessons, takes about a year to complete the 1-year home study course.
Wow.
It is available at philosophy.org/store. And I'll tell you what, there's no course that can parallel it that I've ever experienced. Course on Miracles, a 1 in a scale of 1 to 10 compared to what this can deliver. It's practical spirituality, and most importantly, it's cult proof. There is no middleman between you and the centering fulcrum of the creator within you, which is all mind. And like the ocean, we're but drops in that ocean. But when we look and center ourselves, we can realize how the ocean, how we're part of that, and that's the totality of mind. And so the simplicity of it too is just utterly unparalleled. And it's not as hard to encompass. Universal One is going to be harder to understand than the home study course, because again, that's his first treatise. Some call it his magnum opus, but I really think the home study course, probably beyond all things, is the most important Russell work ever written, because there's no course like it. And if they had these courses in all the universities, you would see divinity being expressed across this planet, not cities burning.
So do all students, historically that attended the university, did they go through that course as well or something similar?
Yeah, to become an alumnus of the university, you have to complete the course. Purchasing it, the impetus to complete it is on you. You're given a certificate dated 1 year post-purchase, and it's assumed that you'll complete it. I mean, and it's meant to be reread again and again. I've only read it once, and that's all I needed. I said, I got this, I'm running with this.
And it's all written word. It's reading. There's no video or audio component to it.
Correct. I mean, other than what's up on philosophy.org website under videos, you'll see a lot of past homecomings. We did a homecoming with 12, 15 speakers in 2016, about 12 in 2017. Somewhere in there, you're getting a lot of presentations, a lot of people's take on the teachings. That's what we try to offer, different points of view here at the university.
Who was the actor I saw? It might have been one of those homecoming events.
Terrence Howard.
Yes.
Terrence Howard, of all people. And he's an unconventional actor. Definitely. He has his own mind, and he's been ridiculed for having his own thoughts. He created a shape that doesn't exist in the Pythagorean models of shapes, but it's called the all shape. It's incredible. Look into his work. He's really a brilliant guy, and he's got an understanding about matter and form, I'll just say, but he certainly sees what most people don't, and that's not the shape, but what's between them. And he sculpted what was between basically 4 spheres, and that is what he calls his all shape. So really magnificent stuff.
Who knew?
Right, exactly.
Super cool. Well, one last question before I let you go, Matt. And you touched on some of these illuminations that you've had, but more generally speaking, how has Russell's work changed your life, impacted you?
Well, in every sense, for the better. They say when the student's ready, the master appears. And I had heard the name Russell a few times, but truly when I became ready for it, I think that was the moment that, in 2008, when I read The Secret of Light, 11 years later to the day when I finished it, November 1st, 2008, we reopened the University of Science and Philosophy
Wow.
here in Waynesboro, Virginia. And the walls are adorned with 40 tons of art and sculpture. We hung over 500 paintings and drawings, and monumental piece of work. And I'll tell you this much, I could never have done it, that amount of work, had I not had the Russell philosophy, under my belt, and having had experienced that. Because as it said, mediocrity sees obstacles, genius sees opportunity. And man, I met so many obstacles on the way to getting this artwork back out on display, which was a primary goal, from back in 2010 when I first visited Swannanoa and said, "Where's the art?"
Yeah.
Nobody knew. It's in a warehouse somewhere. It's down by a river. Might have got flooded. Nobody knows. So I was like, well, I'm going to find out and do what I can to, get in touch with the right people. And so the former president of the university, Michael Hudak, was watching my progress over the years and watched my series, Knowing the Creator 101, which is up on YouTube if anyone wants to check that out. That breaks the process of creation down according to a Russell perspective and other illuminates of that day.
Cool.
But ultimately, yeah, it's really the philosophy of how to commune, working knowingly with the creative energy in you, which is boundless. There's no end to the amount of energy you can tap, which is at 90 degrees to your motion body. And once you become acquainted with that and really begin a dialogue with it, you'll never get into a situation that is hopeless if you listen to that still small voice. The still small voice always provides answers and solutions. Learn to communicate with it. If it was your best friend, your conscience, learn to listen, and you will never be sorry that you developed that relationship. I can go back to periods of my life. I heard that still small voice say, "Don't do that, dude." And I did it, and I ended up in big trouble, big, bad situations, right? All of us can say that. Why didn't I listen to that? Well, what are you talking about? What, you didn't listen to what? Well, your conscience. We've all monkeyed around, got ourselves into trouble when we think we can do it without that voice.
Yeah.
We end up going, damn it, I should have listened to that voice. I'm saying listen to it, make it your best friend, develop a cognitive relationship with it, work with it as if it's yourself. And then you get behind your ego and you make your ego your servant. Okay. And then you can command matter to become divine and imbue it with your own divinity.
Wow. Well,
crystallize your thoughts into form.
it's a beautiful thing, man. Well, I know I, for one, am inspired, and I definitely am interested in the home study course. So I think you got at least one new student on board, and hopefully some of those of you listening will feel the same way. And remind us again, where's the best place to go if they want to check out the home study course? And then if they want to see more of your work personally, where should they go?
Yeah, well, the store, philosophy.org/store. The home study course is $250. You're not going to find a better deal for cosmic knowledge on the whole planet. You don't have to go into debt for 30 years with a college and mortgage your house for $250, which is a good night out at a nice restaurant with a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
You could have cosmic knowledge at your fingertips, which will be passed on generation to generation.
Who could pass that up?
Right. You get it for $100 as an e-course on eBay. It all helps fund and preserve the Russell legacy. My own personal work, you can meet at mattpresti.com, mattpresti.com. Got a ton of stuff, 80 music videos, all music I've created that was inspired by, these teachings and other teachings in my pursuit of a spiritual cause for the material me.
Yeah. Awesome.
But it's all out there, free. Knowing the Creator 101. I did the Secret of Light series, which is 3 hours, 33 minutes of video supporting the Russell teachings and using their quotes and putting graphics to it to help people better understand the science. And so there's a lot of stuff out there on my YouTube channel. You can check that out as long as I'm still there. I know
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Purging a lot of things lately. Oh, and we did get banned from Amazon.
Oh, congratulations.
The university cannot sell its books on Amazon.
Oh my God.
So like the Pope tried to ban the Universal One, Amazon did ban the university off their site. So if you support philosophy.org/store, you're helping support the legacy of the Russells. And making sure
Absolutely.
this stuff continues to go out to the world.
Well, getting banned by Amazon or YouTube is, I think, a badge of honor. It just means you're telling the truth. So
There you go.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this twice. And I hope we can do it a third time down the road. And I really appreciate all your work and your time today.
Well, genius sees opportunity, mediocrity sees obstacles. You know which side of the wave we're on, brother. Keep unfolding it. I look
Will
forward
do.
to seeing more of your podcasts coming around.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, brother.